My name is Sonia Whitfield, and at 63 years old, I spent almost $40,000 and 8 months of my life trying to prove that the woman my son married was a liar. Here is the part I still can't make peace with. I was right that somebody in my family was lying. I just had the wrong person. The night everything came apart, I wasn't in a courtroom or a lawyer's office. I was sitting in a hard plastic chair beside a bed in a nursing home on the edge of Durham, holding the hand of a man I had never met in my life. 70 years old, a stranger, and in my lap was a letter 4 pages written in my husband's handwriting. That careful slanted print I'd seen on 36 years of birthday cards and grocery lists and love notes tucked into my coat pocket. The letter was not addressed to me. It was addressed to a name I had never once heard Elijah say out loud in all our years together. Nathaniel. My husband Elijah Whitfield died 18 months ago. Half of Durham came to the funeral. They called him a self-made man. They called him proof that a poor black boy from nothing could build something that lasted. The pastor stood up and said Elijah Whitfield built his company with his own 2 hands, and the whole church said amen, and I sat in the front pew and believed every word because I had believed it for 36 years. I inherited $11.4 million when he passed, and I spent a good part of the last year and a half certain that my new daughter-in-law had married my son to get her hands on it. I watched her. I hired people. I went digging through her past. I was so proud of myself for protecting my family, for being the smart one, the careful one, the widow who wouldn't be fooled. And every single thing I turned up pointed away from her and toward the man in the photograph on my mantle. The man I'd made coffee for every morning of my adult life. The man I'd buried. I'm going to tell you this whole story, start to finish, the way it actually happened, because I've learned something the hard way. There are some secrets that don't protect anybody. They just wait. But before I tell you what was in that letter, and before I tell you who the man in that bed really was, I need you to understand one thing. I did not go looking for the truth about my husband. I went looking for dirt on a young woman named Camille. The truth about Elijah found me anyway. And it started the way these things always seem to, with a wedding. Let me tell you about Elijah first, because you can't understand what this did to me unless you understand what he was to me. I met Elijah Whitfield in the fall of 1988 in a hardware store off Fayetteville Street, where I'd gone to buy a can of paint I couldn't really afford for a classroom that wasn't really mine to paint. I was 25, a first-year kindergarten teacher with more student loans than sense. He was behind the counter, though I'd learn later that he owned the place, and he had this slow, crooked smile like he was in on a joke the rest of the world hadn't heard yet. Most folks buy the cheap brush and paint the room twice, he told me. Most folks have more than $11 to their name, I said. He gave me the good brush for the price of the cheap one. Then he asked me to dinner. 11 months later, I married him in my mother's backyard, 40 people, and a borrowed dress. We were married 36 years. Elijah had come up hard. His daddy worked in a mill and died young. His mama cleaned houses. Elijah dropped out of community college and taught himself everything engines, tools, business numbers. Especially numbers. By the time I met him, he had that one hardware store and a little manufacturing shop he was building on the side, a company called Whitfield Industrial. It made a pipe coupling, a small metal fitting, nothing you'd ever notice, the kind of part that keeps a factory's pipes from bursting. Doesn't sound like much, but that little fitting built everything we ever had. Over the years, it grew. 5 employees, then 50, then a plant with our name on the side of the building in letters 10 feet tall. And through all of it, we lived in the same 4-bedroom house we bought when I was pregnant with Julian. The same house I'm sitting in right now. Elijah drove a truck until the odometer gave out. He owned one good suit. Money remembers where it came from, he used to say. You start flashing it around, you attract the wrong kind of people. I must have heard him say that 1,000 times. Money remembers where it came from. I had it stitched on a throw pillow for our anniversary once. It's still on the couch behind me. There was only one thing Elijah never talked about, and I never pushed because everybody's allowed their quiet places. He never talked about the very beginning, the first year or two before the store before me. If I asked how he got started, he'd change the subject to something right in front of us. Dinner, the game, Julian's grades. There was one old photograph he kept in the study for years, a faded little snapshot of that first shop, and I remember maybe 15 years ago noticing that it had come down off the shelf. When I asked about it, he said the frame broke. I never saw the picture again. I didn't think about it twice. I think about it now every single day. The cancer came fast. Pancreatic. By the time they found it, the doctors were already using the gentle voices. He fought 14 months. Julian came home from the university most weekends, and the three of us made the best of a bad thing the way families do bad jokes, good food, old stories. Near the end, Elijah slept more than he was awake, and the morphine took him places I couldn't follow. In his last week, he got agitated a few times the way people do when they're leaving. He'd grip my hand hard enough to hurt and try to tell me something, and it never came out clean. Something about a box. "The box," he kept saying. "Sonia, the box you have to..." And then he'd lose the thread. And a name. He said a name more than once in those last days. A name I didn't know. I figured he was dreaming back somewhere in his childhood, talking to somebody long gone. I held his hand and told him it was all right, that he could rest, that I'd take care of everything. I thought I was soothing a dying man's confusion. I know now he was trying to confess. Elijah died on a Tuesday morning 18 months ago with Julian and me on either side of the bed. And after the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the house went quiet, I finally sat down with our accountant and learned the full size of what my husband had left behind. He'd sold Whitfield Industrial 3 years before he got sick. Sold it to a national manufacturer for just under $8 million. He'd invested carefully. Between the sale, the investments, the life insurance, and the properties I inherited, $11.4 million. $11.4 million. I'd spent 36 years clipping coupons. Julian got a trust, a modest one set to mature when he turned 35, which was just about a year away. Elijah had built it that way on purpose. He wanted our son to make his own way first, the same as he'd had to. "A boy who's handed everything never learns what he's made of," he told me once. "Let Julian stand on his own 2 feet a while, then he'll be ready." So I did what Elijah's would have wanted. I told almost no one what I had. Not the church, not the neighbors, not even Julian, not the real number. He knew we were comfortable. He had no idea it was 11 million, and I liked it that way. It felt like the last promise I was keeping to my husband. For a long time, the money just sat there in accounts I barely looked at, managed by a financial advisor named Raymond Ellison, while I learned how to be a person without the man I'd built my whole life around. I wore his robe. I slept on his side of the bed. I talked to his photograph. Julian was my anchor through those months. He called every day. He worried over me. My good, gentle boy, the history professor who could tell you everything about the past and had no idea what was hiding in his own families. And then 7 months ago, he met Camille. He called me on a Sunday, and I could hear it in his voice before he even said her name. That lift, that lightness. My Julian had always been a serious young man, careful with his heart, the way he was careful with everything. He'd had a girlfriend or two over the years, nothing that stuck. At 34, he seemed content with his books and his students, and I'd more or less made my peace with the idea that he might always be a bit of a loner. "Mom, I met somebody," he said. "I think you're going to like her." Her name was Camille Rhodes. She was 30. They'd met at a fundraising gala for the university where she worked in development for a nonprofit. He described her the way you describe someone you've already fallen for. She was smart. She was easy to talk to. She asked good questions. "She's not like anybody I've met," he said. 2 weeks later, they were seeing each other every day. A month after that, he brought her to Sunday dinner. I wanted to love her. I want you to know that. I'd waited a long time to see my son look at somebody like that. And Camille was lovely, not flashy, not the way I'd half expected. She wore a plain gray dress and simple shoes, and she drove up in a Corolla that had to be 15 years old. She was polite. She complimented my greens. She helped clear the table without being asked. And still, from the very first hour, something in me went quiet and careful. The way you go quiet when you hear a sound in the house at night, and you're not sure yet whether it's the furnace or a footstep. I couldn't have told you what it was. She was gracious. She was warm with Julian. But every so often I'd catch her looking around my living room at the photos at Elijah's chair, at the letters on the mantel, with an expression I couldn't read. Not greedy exactly, more like she was looking for something. At dinner she asked about Elijah, which was natural. Of course she'd ask, but it was the way she asked. "Julian told me his father built a company from nothing," she said. "Whitfield Industrial. That's an incredible story. How did he get started? How did he get started?" The one question Elijah himself would never answer. "He built it up over a lot of years," I said. "Hard work mostly." She nodded. She smiled. She let it go, but her eyes stayed on me a beat too long. "My husband used to say, 'Trust your gut, Sonia. It knows things before your head catches up.' That night, for the first time in a long while, my gut was trying to tell me something. Over the next couple of months, Julian and Camille got serious faster than I'd have liked. But Julian was a grown man, and I remembered his father proposing to me after 11 months, so who was I to talk? But those months were also when my quiet worry turned into something with a shape. It was the questions. Every time I saw Camille, she came back around to the same territory, and always so gently, so reasonably that Julian never seemed to notice. "Mrs. Whitfield, can I ask you something?" she said one afternoon, helping me wash dishes while Julian took a call in the other room. When Mr. Whitfield first started out, was it always just him? Or did he have a partner in the beginning? Somebody he started the shop with. I stopped my hands in the soapy water. "It was always just Elijah," I said. "He built it himself. Why do you ask?" "No reason," she said lightly. "I just think it's amazing doing something like that alone." Another time at a restaurant, she steered the conversation to the sale. "A national company bought Whitfield Industrial, didn't they? That must have been quite a deal. Do you remember what year it was? Who handled it?" Now understand, I ran our household finances for 36 years. Elijah made sure I understood every account, every policy, every dollar. I could have answered every question she asked. But something in me had gone still and watchful, and I found myself playing dumb. "Oh, Elijah handled all the business," I said. "I never followed any of that. It was a lie. But it felt like the right one." Here's the thing I couldn't square, though, the thing that should have made me stop and think and didn't. If Camille was after money, and I was more sure of it by the week, she was the strangest gold digger I'd ever heard of. She never asked me for anything. She never let Julian buy her nice things. She'd get embarrassed when he tried. She clipped coupons like I did. That 15-year-old Corolla had a cracked windshield she wouldn't fix. She packed her lunch in a paper bag to save a few dollars. But there was one thing that didn't fit the frugality, and I noticed it without understanding it. One evening at dinner, Julian mentioned, kind of laughing, that Camille sent money somewhere every single month, a good chunk of her paycheck, and she wouldn't tell him where it went. "She says it's family," he said, shrugging, still smiling. "Some things a person keeps private, I guess." Camille's face changed when he said it. Just for a second. She looked at him, then at me, then down at her plate, and she changed the subject so smoothly that if I hadn't been watching her the way I'd started watching her, I'd have missed it entirely. A woman who wouldn't spend $40 on a windshield was sending hundreds of dollars a month somewhere she wouldn't name. I turned it over that night and came to the wrong conclusion, the way you do when you've already decided how a story ends. I decided she was hiding debts, or hiding a whole other life. I decided it was one more reason not to trust her. I never once considered that she might be telling the exact truth, that it was family, and that the family she was quietly bleeding herself dry to take care of was about to blow my entire world apart. The engagement came 4 months after they met. Julian called me breathless and happy to say he'd proposed, and she'd said yes, and they wanted to marry soon. I said all the right things. I meant about half of them. And then something happened that turned my worry into something colder. They came for dinner one Sunday, and partway through the evening, Camille excused herself to the restroom. She was gone a long time, long enough that I noticed, long enough that I made an excuse and went to check the hallway. The door to Elijah's study was open. I always keep it closed. I keep it the way he left it. Camille was inside. She had her back to me. She was standing at Elijah's old file cabinet, and she had her phone up taking a picture of something. Not the room, not herself. A document. A single sheet of paper she'd slid out of the drawer. I stepped back before she saw me, my heart going hard in my chest. A minute later, she came out, phone in her pocket, apologizing for taking so long, saying she'd gotten a work call. After they left, I went into the study to see what she'd been photographing. The file cabinet was full of old business paperwork, decades of it, most of it meaningless to me. Tax records, contracts, incorporation papers from when the company was young. I couldn't tell what she'd taken a picture of. Everything looked the same as always. Nothing was missing. But I stood in my dead husband's study in the room I kept exactly the way he left it, and I thought, she isn't looking for jewelry. She isn't looking for cash. She's looking for paper. I didn't understand what that meant. It scared me more than if she'd stolen the silver. I called my oldest friend the next morning. Gloria Pruitt and I have been friends for 40 years. She's one of maybe 3 people on this earth who knew the real size of what Elijah left me. We sat in her kitchen with the coffee going cold between us, and I told her everything, the questions the money Camille sent nowhere, the picture of the paper in Elijah's study. Gloria is a blunt woman. "What have you told her?" she asked. "About the money?" Nothing, I said. Not the number. Then don't, Gloria said. Elijah always said keep your cards close till you know who's at the table. You don't know this girl. You keep quiet till you do. And if I'm wrong? I asked her. It was the question underneath everything. What if she loves him, Gloria, and I'm just a bitter old woman who can't stand to share her boy? Then no harm done, she said. If she loves him, your money's got nothing to do with it. But if she's after what Elijah built, you'll be glad you waited. That conversation is what sent me the following week to 2 offices I'd been avoiding. The first was Raymond Ellison, my financial advisor. I told him I was worried, and I asked him to make sure no one could touch my accounts without my direct say-so. He walked me through every protection we had in place. It settled me a little. The second was harder. I went to see an estate attorney named Denise Holloway, a sharp, kind woman about my age, and I laid the whole thing out. And Denise told me something I didn't expect. Something that looking back should have made me question the entire story I was telling myself. Mrs. Whitfield, she said, I understand your worry, and there are things we can do to protect you. But I want to be honest with you about the law. Your assets, the inheritance from your husband, are yours. Separate property. Your son's new wife has no legal claim to them. None. Not while you're living, and if we structure Julian's inheritance properly, not after either. A daughter-in-law can't simply demand your money no matter who she is. I sat there. Then what is she after? I said half to myself. Because that was the piece that never fit, was it? If Camille couldn't legally get a dime of mine, then all her careful questions weren't about getting money at all. But I didn't chase that thought. I was too far down the road I'd chosen. Instead, I heard what I wanted to hear, that Camille might work on Julian, might turn him against me, might push him to pressure me. I decided the danger was influence. I had Denise draw up protections, tighten the trusts, make everything airtight. I even had her help me write a letter to Julian to be given to him if anything ever happened to me explaining my choices. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd done something wise. I'd done something all right. I'd built a fortress against the wrong invader and left the real breach wide open because the real breach wasn't a woman trying to get into my family. It was something my husband had buried 30 years before Camille was ever born and quietly carried to his grave. The wedding was set for a month out. Small, they said. And to their credit, it was maybe 70 people at a garden hall outside town. Nothing extravagant. Julian asked if I'd help with some of the cost, and I did gladly. It was the first time in his adult life he'd asked me for money, and I wasn't about to say no to my son's wedding. But 2 things happened around that wedding that I have never forgotten, and that I understood completely wrong at the time. The first was the week before when I stopped by Julian's apartment to drop something off for the reception. The door was cracked, and I could hear Camille on the phone in the back room, her voice low and urgent in a way I'd never heard from her. It's almost done, she was saying. The wedding's next week, and once I'm actually part of this family, I'll finally have a way in. I'll finally be able to get to it. A way in? Get to it. I stood on that landing with my blood gone cold. Certain that I'd just heard a gold digger count her chickens. I drove home shaking. Everything I suspected confirmed in her own words. I know now she wasn't talking about the money at all. She was talking about something else entirely, something she'd been trying and failing to reach for a very long time. But I heard what I was primed to hear. The second thing happened at the wedding itself. Camille's family was almost entirely absent. Her father, she'd told Julian, had died when she was young. The only person there for her was her mother, a quiet, dignified woman named Deborah Rhodes, who came alone and seemed deeply uncomfortable the whole day. Like she was somewhere she didn't belong and couldn't wait to leave. At the reception, I sat near Deborah and tried to make conversation. It went fine until Julian's godfather, Otis Freeman Elijah's oldest friend, stood up to give a toast. Otis raised his glass and said what everyone in Durham always said. To Elijah Whitfield, God rest him, a man who started with nothing and built an empire with his own 2 hands, if he could see his boy today. And 2 things happened at that table at the exact same moment. Deborah Rhodes went white. She set down her glass, stood up without a word, and walked out toward the parking lot. And Camille, my son's brand new bride in the middle of her own wedding, went absolutely rigid. The smile fell off her face. Her jaw tightened, and for 1 second she looked at Otis Freeman like he'd said something obscene. Then she got up and followed her mother out. I told myself the bride was overwhelmed. I told myself the mother was ill. I sat there sipping a champagne, congratulating myself on being the only person at that table who saw Camille Rhodes for what she was. I had never in my life been so wrong about so much. 2 days after the wedding, before Julian left for a history conference he'd committed to months earlier, the three of us had lunch at my house. It was meant to be easy. A quiet family meal before the newlyweds settled into married life. Camille was different that day. Tired, maybe. Distracted. She kept checking her phone. Julian teased her about it and she laughed it off, but I noticed she'd startle a little every time it buzzed. Toward the end of lunch, Julian went to take a call from his department, and Camille got up to help me carry plates to the kitchen. She'd draped her coat over the back of her chair, and as she reached across for a dish, her elbow caught it, and the coat slid off onto the floor. I bent to pick it up for her, and as I lifted it, something fell out of the inside pocket. A photograph. An old one. Creased soft at the corners, the colors faded orange, the way pictures got in the 70s and 80s. I picked it up off my kitchen floor and I looked at it because you look. And I went cold all over. It was a photograph of a young black man, maybe 25, standing in front of a small cinder block building with a hand-painted sign. He wore a mechanic's apron grease on his hands, and he was grinning at the camera like he owned the whole world and everything in it. I did not know his face. I had never seen this man in my life. But I knew that building. I knew it because I'd seen it in exactly one photograph years ago, the little snapshot Elijah kept in his study. The one of the very first shop. The one that came down off the shelf 15 years back and never went up again. That cinder block building. That hand-painted sign. Elijah's first shop. With a stranger standing in front of it, grinning like the place belonged to him. Camille turned around and saw what was in my hand, and something crossed her face. Fear, I'd swear it was fear, and she reached out fast and took the photo gentle but quick and slipped it back into her coat. "Sorry," she said. It's just an old family picture. It's nothing." An old family picture of a man I didn't know, standing in front of my husband's first shop, carried in the coat pocket of the woman I was so sure had married my son for money. Julian came back into the room and Camille laughed at something he said, and the moment closed over like water. But it wouldn't leave me. All that night and the next day and the day after, that one question sat in my chest and would not be still. If Camille was only after the Whitfield money, then why was she carrying a 30-year-old photograph of a stranger standing in front of the one place my husband would never ever talk about? I didn't have an answer. I was about to go looking for one. And 5 days after the wedding, the answer came looking for me first, in a black car in my own driveway wearing an expensive suit. 5 days after the wedding on a Thursday morning, I was in the garden pulling weeds when I heard tires on my gravel drive. Julian had left the day before for his conference 3 days in Atlanta, presenting a paper he'd worked on all year. Camille had gone back to work. I was alone. I looked up, and a black car I didn't recognize, a Lincoln long and polished, was pulling in behind my little Honda. A man got out. Middle-aged, silver at the temples, in a charcoal suit that cost more than I made in a month back when I was teaching. He carried a leather briefcase. He had the careful, neutral face I recognized from a lifetime of sitting across desks from Elijah's lawyers. Something in my stomach dropped. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said, coming up the walk. "Sonia Whitfield." "Yes." "My name is Curtis Vaughn. I'm an attorney." He reached into his jacket for a card. "I'm sorry to come to your home unannounced. I've been trying to reach you about a matter concerning your late husband And that's as far as he got, because everything in me had already snapped shut like a trap. An attorney. About my late husband. 5 days after the wedding. Julian conveniently out of town. And here on my doorstep was a lawyer in an expensive suit come to talk about Elijah's estate. I knew exactly what this was. Or I thought I did. This was Camille's people. This was the other shoe. She'd married my son, and now while Julian was in Atlanta and couldn't see it, her lawyer had come to feel out the widow. To start the long, polite campaign to get at the Whitfield money. I did not let him finish his sentence. I don't know who sent you," I said, and my voice came out hard and shaking at once. "But I have nothing to say to you. Whatever this is about, you can take it up with my attorney. Denise Holloway. Look her up." "Mrs. Whitfield, please, I really don't think you understand what "I understand fine," I said. "You've got the wrong woman if you think you're going to come around my house and No, good day. Ma'am, at least take my..." He held out the card. I turned around and walked back into my house and shut the door. Locked it. Stood in the hall with my heart going like a hammer, listening until I heard the Lincoln start up and back down the drive and pull away. I was proud of myself. I want you to hear that because it's the part that shames me most. I stood in my hallway 63 years old and I felt sharp. I felt like Elijah's widow, like I'd seen it coming and shut it down before it started. Keep your cards close till you know who's at the table. I'd sent the vulture packing. There is a card, a plain white business card that Curtis Vaughn slid halfway under my door before he left. I found it that evening. Curtis Vaughn, attorney at law, and a phone number. I looked at it for a second and then I dropped it in the kitchen trash on top of the coffee grounds. If I had picked up that phone, I would have learned everything. Everything. On day 5, standing in my own kitchen, I could have known all of it and been spared 8 months and $40,000 and the worst night of my life. But I didn't know that yet. I threw the vulture's card in the trash and I felt clever doing it. I had just turned away the one man who came to tell me the truth. Then I went looking for it the hard way. For a few days after the wedding, I told myself the photograph was nothing. An old family picture, like she said. People carry all kinds of things. But I couldn't put it down. A stranger. In front of Elijah's first shop. In the coat pocket of the woman I'd spent 7 months mistrusting. And that shop, the one place my husband would never talk about the one photograph that came down off the shelf and never went back up. It wasn't the money that made me start digging. I want to be clear about that because it matters to how this ends. If it had only been about the money, I'd have called Denise and let the lawyers handle it. What made me start was that photograph. Some animal part of me had caught a scent and it would not let go. I called Raymond Ellison first. I asked him I felt foolish even saying it whether Elijah had ever had a business partner. In the beginning, before the company got big, there was a pause on the line. Not that I ever saw in the records I handled, Raymond said. Elijah was always the sole owner, far as I knew. But Sonia I only came on in the 90s. I don't have anything from the very early years. Why? I didn't have a good answer. Just something I'm trying to understand, I said. Denise Holloway gave me the name. When I told her I wanted to look into someone's background quietly, carefully, she didn't ask too many questions. She gave me the number of a man she used, a retired detective turned private investigator named Dale Foster. This is where the $40,000 started. Investigators, record searches, court filings, certified copies. An old woman with more money than sense and a bad feeling she couldn't name, spending it a few $100s at a time to answer a question she didn't even know how to ask. I told Dale Foster I wanted 2 things. I wanted to know everything there was to know about a young woman named Camille Rhodes. And I wanted to know whether my husband Elijah Whitfield had ever in the whole history of Whitfield Industrial had a partner. Give me a couple weeks, he said. It took him 9 days to call me back. And when he did, his voice had something in it I didn't like. Mrs. Whitfield, he said, I think you better come down to my office. There's some things here you're going to want to see with your own eyes. Dale Foster's office was 2 rooms above a dry cleaner's on Chapel Hill Street. He had a folder waiting on the desk, and he didn't make small talk. You asked if your husband had a partner, he said. He did. He slid a photocopy across the desk. An official document from the state, Articles of Incorporation. I'd seen 100 like it in Elijah's files. But the name at the top of this one was not Whitfield Industrial. It said Whitfield and Boyd Manufacturing Incorporated, filed in 1981. 2 names on the founding paperwork. 2 signatures at the bottom. One I knew as well as my own, Elijah's tight slanted hand, and one I had never seen in my life. Nathaniel Boyd. I read it 3 times. The letters didn't change. 1981, I said. That's before I met him. Yes, ma'am, Dale said. The company started as a partnership. 2 men, your husband and a man named Nathaniel Boyd. And there's more. He laid out another sheet. A patent. United States Patent Office granted in 1982 for a pipe coupling assembly. The invention that built everything I had. The coupling. Our coupling. Now here's the thing, Dale said, and he tapped the patent. The company had 2 founders. But this patent, the one the whole business was built on, was filed and granted in one name only. And the early design work, the engineering notes, those trace back to the other partner. To Boyd. He was the maker. Your husband handled the business end, the money, the paperwork. Elijah handled the money, the paperwork, especially the numbers. I could hear him saying it. I taught myself everything, especially numbers. I sat there and told myself it meant nothing. Partners assign patents. Businesses are complicated. There was surely an explanation. What happened to him? I asked. To Boyd. Dale Foster looked at me for a moment, and I understood that whatever came next was the reason he'd wanted me to come in and hear it with my own ears. That, he said, is the part you're not going to like. He slid over a 3rd stack. Court records. Older, grainier, stamped and certified. In 1983, he said Nathaniel Boyd was arrested, charged with fraud and embezzlement against Whitfield and Boyd Manufacturing. The company's own books showed money-missing contracts, forged funds moved into accounts in Boyd's name. It went to trial. And the state's chief witness, the man whose testimony put it all together, he didn't have to finish. "Elijah," I said. "Your husband testified against his partner," Dale said quietly. "Boyd was convicted on 9 counts, sentenced to 8 years, served just under 7. I looked down at the papers. A young man's booking photo stared back at me, the same face from the photograph on my kitchen floor, only not grinning now. Not grinning at all. Nathaniel Boyd. A prisoner number and a date, and a face like the bottom had dropped out of the world. And here's the thing about the human mind. About my mind. About a wife who'd spent 36 years loving a man and 18 months grieving him. In the space of about 10 seconds sitting in that little office over the dry cleaners, I took every terrible fact on that desk, and I turned it inside out to save my husband. Of course. Boyd was the partner Elijah never talked about because Boyd had betrayed him. Boyd stole from the company. Boyd forged the contracts. That's why the patent ended up in Elijah's name, because Elijah was the honest one, and Boyd was a thief who got what he deserved. My husband hadn't hidden a partner out of guilt. He'd hidden him out of shame, the shame of having trusted the wrong man. I actually felt relief. God forgive me, I felt relief. "Well," I said, and I could hear how brittle my own voice was. "Then the man was a criminal. It's sad, but my husband was the victim here, Mr. Foster, not the villain." Dale Foster looked at me a long moment. He had the face of a man who'd sat across from a lot of people telling themselves a lot of stories. "Maybe so," he said. "That's the record anyway. I just find things, ma'am. I don't tell folks what they mean." He paused. "But there's one more thing you asked me to find. The young woman, Camille Rhodes. What about her?" He slid over one last sheet. "A birth certificate. She was born in 1995, Dale said. Mother listed as Deborah Rhodes, and the father, I was already looking at it. I was already reading the name in the box marked father, and the room was already tilting because some part of me had known since the photograph fell out of her coat. Had known and refused to know. Father Nathaniel Boyd. The woman your son married, Dale Foster said, is Nathaniel Boyd's daughter. I don't remember the drive home. I remember sitting in my car in my own driveway for a long time with the engine off the birth certificate on the seat beside me, building the story I needed to believe. Camille Rhodes was Nathaniel Boyd's daughter. Boyd the partner who'd stolen from my husband and gone to prison for it. And now, 30 years later, his daughter had walked into a university gala, found my sweet, unsuspecting son, the son of the man who'd testified against her father, made him fall in love with her in a matter of weeks, and married him. This wasn't love. This was a grudge in a gray dress. She'd come for revenge, or money, or both. The questions made sense now. Did he have a partner in the beginning? She'd known he had. She'd been testing me. The photograph in her coat, she carried her father's picture like a soldier carries a reason. The snooping, the picture of the document, the phone call, once I'm part of this family, I'll finally have a way in. She was looking for something. Evidence. Ammunition. And my Julian had no idea. My boy had married a woman who'd chosen him not for who he was, but for whose son he was. I was so sure. I was so completely, thoroughly sure. I had all the pieces, and they all fit, and I never once turned the picture over to see if it fit the other way, too. I decided sitting in that driveway that I would protect my son whether he wanted me to or not. I would show him exactly who he'd married. I would end it before that woman could do whatever she'd come to do. I picked the wrong night and the wrong weapon. I was about to detonate my own family with a truth that wasn't even the real one, but I didn't know that. I called Julian and asked him to bring Camille to dinner on Sunday. There was something I said that the three of us needed to talk about. Sunday came. I set the table with my good dishes the way I used to when Elijah was alive. I don't know why. Some part of me needed it to look like a family. They came at 6. Julian was easy happy, still glowing from the wedding and the trip. Camille was quieter. She'd caught something in my voice on the phone, I think. She kept glancing at me across the table, and I kept my face still, and we made it through the meal on small talk while a bomb sat under the tablecloth. When the plates were cleared, Julian leaned back. "So what did you want to talk about, Mom?" I had rehearsed it 100 ways. In the end, I just reached for the folder I'd tucked beside my chair, set it on the table, and looked at my daughter-in-law. "I want to talk about who Camille really is," I said. The color went out of her face. "Mom," Julian said, half a laugh, "what are you—" "Her name is Camille Rhodes. Rhodes is her mother's name. But her father—" I opened the folder and turned the birth certificate around so he could see it. Her father was a man named Nathaniel Boyd, and 30 years ago Nathaniel Boyd was your father's business partner. The two of them started this company together, and then your father testified against him in court, and Nathaniel Boyd went to prison for 7 years. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock in the hall. Julian stared at the paper, then at me, then at his wife. "Camille?" His voice had gone strange and small. "Is any of that true?" This was the moment I had been so sure of. This is where I expected her to break. To cry, to deny, to scramble, to be exposed as the schemer I'd built in my head. She didn't do any of that. Camille sat very straight in her chair. Her eyes were wet, but her voice when it came was steady as stone. "Yes," she said. "Nathaniel Boyd is my father. All of it's true." She looked at Julian and her face broke a little just at the edges. "I should have told you. I know. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go the way it—" "You lied to me," Julian said. "From the beginning. You knew who my father was. You knew when we met. Didn't you?" "Yes," she whispered. "I knew. So this whole thing us was that." He couldn't finish it. "No," she said, and now the tears came. "No, Julian, that part is real. I swear to you, that part is the one thing in all of this that's real." "Enough," I said. I turned to my son. I thought I was rescuing him. "Julian, do you see now she came here because of a grudge? Her father was a criminal who—" And that's when Camille stood up. She wasn't crying anymore. Something in her had gone quiet and terrible, and she looked at me across my own dinner table, across my good dishes, and she said the words that ended one story and started another. "My father was not a criminal." Her voice was shaking. "My father invented that coupling. Every dollar you have, every dollar in that 11 million you think you're protecting my father, made it with his hands in the shop in that photograph. And your husband took it from him and put him in a cage for it." Elijah Whitfield knew exactly what he did. He knew every single day of his life. "That's a lie," I said, but my voice had no floor under it. "Is it—" Camille picked up her purse. She looked at Julian, and whatever was between them broke clean across her face. "Ask him why there's a photograph missing from his study, Mrs. Whitfield. Ask him what he kept saying at the end." I froze. The box. A name. "You don't know anything about your husband," Camille said. "You spent 36 years next to a man you never met." And then Julian stood up too. But he wasn't reaching for me, and he wasn't reaching for her. He was backing toward the door, and his face. My son's face was the face of a man watching the ground open under both his feet at once. "I can't," he said. "I can't be here. Both of you. I can't." "Julian," I started. "You went behind my back." He said it to me, and it cut deeper than anything Camille had said. "You hired people. You did all of this, and you didn't tell me." He looked at Camille. "And you're my wife, and you've been lying to my face since the night we met." He walked out. The door shut. A car started. And then it was just me alone in my dining room with my good dishes and a folder full of facts and the terrible dawning suspicion that I had proved the wrong person was lying, and that the real liar was the man I'd buried. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. Camille's words wouldn't leave me. Ask him what he kept saying at the end. Because I knew what he'd kept saying at the end. I'd been telling myself for 18 months that it was morphine and dreaming, a box, and a name. I'd never known the name. Now I did. Nathaniel. Elijah in his last days, gripping my hand, trying with everything he had left to tell me about a box, and saying the name of the man he'd sent to prison. I called Raymond Ellison the next morning. My hands were not steady. "Raymond," I said, "did Elijah have a safe deposit box, one I don't know about?" The pause told me the answer before he did. "There's a box at this downtown branch," Raymond said slowly. "In his name. I've never had access to it. It wasn't part of the estate accounts. He set it up years ago. I assumed you knew. Sonia, is everything all right?" It took me 2 days to get in. A death certificate, the executor paperwork, a bank officer, a key. On a gray Wednesday afternoon, 8 months after I'd started digging, I sat alone in a little windowless room at the bank with a long gray metal box in front of me, and I lifted the lid. There was no jewelry, no cash, no stock certificates. There was a stack of papers, a leather portfolio, and on top a photograph, the twin of the one that fell from Camille's coat. 2 young men in front of a cinder block shop, Nathaniel Boyd grinning, and beside him, his arm around Boyd's shoulders, young and lean and alive, my husband. Elijah had kept it all these years. Not on the shelf. Here, locked away where no one would ever see. I went through the papers slowly, and then not slowly at all. The original design notebooks. Boyd's handwriting page after page. Sketches, measurements, calculations for the coupling dated 1980 and 1981, a full year before the patent. Boyd's invention. Boyd's beyond any question. The real company books. The true ones. Showing that the money the court said Boyd had stolen had never gone missing at all. It had been moved on paper by Elijah into accounts made to look like Boyd's. Letters, bank records, a whole architecture of lies built carefully decades ago by a man who was very, very good with numbers. And then I understood the shape of it all at once in that little room. Nathaniel Boyd did not steal from my husband. My husband stole from Nathaniel Boyd. He took the man's invention and put his own name on the patent. And when Boyd fought him for it, Elijah used his control of the books to build a fraud that had never happened. And he stood up in a court of law and swore to it. And he sent an innocent man to prison for 7 years. The coupling was Boyd's. The company was Boyd's. The $11.4 million I had been so proud of protecting was Boyd's. And Elijah knew. Every day of his life, every anniversary, every Sunday dinner, every time he told our son to stand on his own 2 feet and earn what he had, every single time he said money remembers where it came from, he knew exactly where his had come from and from whom he had taken it. I sat in that room and I did not cry and I did not move. 36 years. The man I made coffee for. The man whose robe I still wore to bed. The man half of Durham stood up in church to praise. I never met him. At the bottom of the box under all of it there was one more thing. A single sheet of good paper folded once in Elijah's hand, but not the tight, sure hand I knew. This writing was shaky, slow, the hand of a dying man. It was a letter. Unfinished, cut off in the middle of a sentence as though he'd run out of strength or courage or time, and it was not addressed to me. At the top of the page in my husband's failing hand was a single word, Nathaniel. I sat in that little bank room for a long time before I could bring myself to read it. I want to tell you exactly what my husband wrote in that shaking hand in what must have been the last clear hour he had. I've read it so many times I could recite it in my sleep. Nathaniel, I have started this letter 100 times in 40 years and burned every one. I am out of time now, so this one will have to stand however poor it is. What I did to you was the worst thing one man can do to another, and I did it with my eyes open. The coupling was yours. The company was yours. I wanted it, and I was afraid of being poor again, and I told myself a lie so many times I almost believed it. But I never believed it. Not once. I knew what I took from you, and I knew what it cost you, and I let you sit in that cell, and I built a whole life on top of what should have been yours. I have no right to ask you for anything, but I have tried these last 2 years to find you to make what little right I can before I go. I have set aside, and there it stopped, mid-sentence. He never finished it. Whatever he'd meant to say he'd set aside, the pen had gone still. I sat there holding the last words of a man I'd loved for 36 years and never known at all, and I understood that he had died with this on his chest, that the box and the name and the thing he couldn't get out at the end, this was it. He hadn't been dreaming. He'd been trying to send me here. Underneath the letter in the leather portfolio were the papers that finished his sentence for him. I have set aside $2 million, a trust, established 22 months before he died when the diagnosis was still fresh, and he must have known his time was short. The documents named it plainly in the cold language of lawyers, a trust for the benefit of the family of Nathaniel Boyd. $2 million waiting in an account for a family Elijah had spent 2 years trying to find. And clipped to the trust documents was a business card, a plain white card. I'd seen its twin once before on top of my own coffee grounds and my own kitchen trash. Curtis Vaughn, attorney at law. I put my hand over my mouth. Curtis Vaughn was not Camille's lawyer. He had never been Camille's lawyer. Curtis Vaughn was the attorney my husband had hired to hold that $2 million and to find the Boyd family and to make things right. The man in the black Lincoln in the expensive suit who came to my door 5 days after the wedding and tried to tell me about a matter concerning my late husband. He had come to complete Elijah's dying wish. He had come to tell me my husband's secret and to give the Boyd family what they were owed. And I had called him a vulture and thrown his card in the trash. I found out the rest when I finally called him, and I did call him that same afternoon from a bench outside the bank, my voice barely working. His investigators had spent 2 years looking. They had only recently traced the Boyd family here to Durham. He'd been trying to reach me for months, and I'd never returned a call from a number I didn't know. And he had come to my house that Thursday because his search had finally turned up a name that stopped him cold. A young woman, Nathaniel Boyd's daughter, married 5 days earlier to Julian Whitfield. He had come to tell me, and I had shut the door in his face. 2 searches running for years toward the same small broken family, Elijah's out of guilt and Camille's out of love, and they had arrived at the same doorstep in the same week. And I, standing in the middle, so sure I knew what I was looking at, had turned them both away. I don't know how I drove home. I only know the certainty I'd carried for 8 months was gone, and in its place was something I'd never felt in my life, the specific horror of discovering you have spent your whole righteousness on the wrong target. I had 2 people to face. My son, who had walked out of my house believing his wife was a liar and his mother was a snake, and who was on the first count not entirely wrong, which made it worse. And Camille. Camille, whom I had hunted and cornered and unmasked at my own dinner table, and who had told me the plain truth to my face while I called her father a criminal. Julian wasn't answering my calls, so I did the only thing left to me. I found an address for Deborah Rhodes, and I drove to a small brick house on the east side of town, and I knocked on the door of the woman who'd walked out of my son's wedding. She didn't want to let me in. I don't blame her, but I stood on her step and said, "I know what my husband did to Nathaniel. I have proof, and I came to say I'm sorry and to ask what I can do." And something in her face gave way, and she opened the door. We sat in her kitchen for 2 hours. She told me about the man in the photograph, about Nathaniel Boyd, who could build anything, who'd sketched that coupling on the back of a diner placemat and knew it was going to change everything, about the young partner he'd trusted who was so good with numbers, about the arrest that came out of nowhere and the trial where his own partner sat up straight and swore him into a cell, about the 7 years, about the man who came out the other side quiet and gray and afraid of his own shadow, a maker who could no longer make anything because no one would hire an ex-convict, and who never once spoke about what he'd built or what had been taken. "He lost his name," Deborah said. "You understand, a man's name is the one thing that's supposed to be his, and Elijah Whitfield took his and wore it like a coat." I asked about Camille. Deborah looked at me a long moment, deciding something. "You should ask her yourself," she said. "But I'll tell you this. Everything that girl has done this past year she did for her father. Not for money. She's never wanted a dime of that man's money." She paused. "She's been spending her own." "Spending it on what?" I asked. And that was when Deborah Rhodes told me the thing that broke what was left of me. "On keeping him alive," she said. "Nathaniel isn't dead, Mrs. Whitfield. He's in a care home out on Route 9, and my daughter's been paying for it out of her own pocket for 3 years. Alive. Nathaniel Boyd was alive. The man in the booking photo, the man in the snapshot on my kitchen floor, the man my husband had ruined, he was not a ghost from 30 years ago. He was an old man in a care home 20 minutes from where I sat. And the mysterious money Camille sent every month, the money that didn't fit the money I'd decided was proof of some secret debt or hidden shame that money was keeping her father fed and warm and cared for. The woman who wouldn't fix her windshield. And now I understood the whole of it. All the questions, all the searching. The marriage itself. Camille hadn't come for money. She had come for a name. Her father was old and failing and running out of time, and somewhere in this family, in a locked box, in old papers, and the truth I'd been sitting on top of for 18 months, was the only proof that Nathaniel Boyd had never been a criminal, that he'd built something great, that it had been stolen. She had married into the one family that held the one thing that could give her father back his name before he died. It was the most desperate, reckless, love-soaked thing I'd ever heard. And it was, I'll be honest with you, a terrible thing to do to my son. She had chosen Julian at the start for what he could give her. She had lied to him for a year. That was real, and it was wrong, and I won't pretend otherwise because Julian is my child and he was hurt. But somewhere in it, she'd fallen in love with him anyway. I believe that now. I believe it the way I believe the sun comes up. It took me 3 days to get them both in the same room. Julian wouldn't come for me. He came in the end because I called him and said, "Your father was a thief, and I can prove it, and there's a man you need to meet." I laid it all out on the same dining table where I'd blown everything up a week before. The incorporation papers, the design notebooks, the real books, the confession letter in his father's shaking hand, the $2 million trust, Curtis Vaughn, and last gently the truth about the man on Route 9. Julian read his father's letter twice. My steady, scholarly son who studies for a living how the past shapes the present, sat at my table and learned that everything he'd been given, his education, His comfort, the trust fund waiting to mature on his 35th birthday, had been built on a man in a cell. Then he looked at his wife. "You could have told me," he said. "Any day in the last year you could have told me and I'd have helped you." "I know," Camille said. "I was afraid, and by the time I loved you enough to tell you the truth, I was too afraid of losing you to say it." She was crying. "I don't want your family's money, Julian. I never did. I only ever wanted them to know my father made that coupling. That's all. That's everything. I don't know yet if my son can forgive being lied to for a year. That isn't my story to finish. It's theirs." But I watched him reach across my table and take her hand, and I watched her hold on to it like it was the only solid thing in the world, and I thought maybe. There was one thing left to do, and it couldn't wait. Camille had told us her father had good days and bad days and fewer good ones all the time. "I want to meet him," I said. "I want to meet Nathaniel, and I want to bring the letter." The care facility on Route 9 sat at the edge of Durham, its yellow paint gone chalky with age. Camille led us down a hallway that smelled of disinfectant and cafeteria coffee, and she stopped outside a door marked 14. "Some days he knows me," she said quietly. "Some days he doesn't. I never know which it'll be until I'm in the room." She looked at me. "Please don't be upset if he doesn't understand who you are. He hasn't been able to hold on too much these last months." She pushed the door open. An old man sat by the window in a wheelchair, a plaid blanket over his knees. His hair was white. His hands, the hands that had sketched an invention on the back of a diner placemat, the hands that had built the thing that made my family rich, lay in his lap, trembling faintly, the way old hands do. "Daddy," Camille said, soft as anything, "you've got some visitors today." Nathaniel Boyd looked up. For a moment his eyes were empty, a window with no one behind it. Then something flickered dim and uncertain like the last light at the end of a day. "Now," he said, studying me. "Who's this?" I crossed the room and knelt down beside his chair. A 63-year-old woman with $11 million in the bank, and I had no idea on this earth how to begin to apologize for a thing I hadn't even known existed a week before. "My name is Sonia," I said. "I'm Elijah Whitfield's wife." The name landed in that little room like a stone into still water. His trembling hands went still, and I braced for it, for anger, for grief, for whatever a man keeps locked away for the person who destroyed his life. But that isn't what came. Nathaniel Boyd's cloudy eyes filled with tears, and he leaned toward me and he whispered, "Elijah, how's he doing? Is he all right?" A slow smile broke across his face, wondering and sweet. "We had us a little shop, you know, he and I, long time ago." He shook his head, marveling. He was better with the numbers than I ever was. He didn't remember. The dementia had taken it, the theft, the trial, the 7 years, the poverty, the bitterness. It had reached into his mind and pulled out all the pain and left behind only this, a friend and a shop, and the good days before it all came apart. I had come to ask his forgiveness, and the man had nothing to forgive me for because he no longer remembered being wronged. I took the letter out of my purse. My hands weren't much steadier than his, and I read it to him. I read my husband's confession out loud, the apology Elijah never had the courage to send every shaking word of it to the man it was written for. Behind me, I could hear Camille, one hand pressed hard over her mouth, her shoulders shaking. When I finished, I folded the letter and I took Nathaniel Boyd's trembling hands in both of mine. "People are going to know what you made," I told him. "I promise you that. The whole world is going to know you built it. Your name is going to be yours again." He smiled at me, that same wondering, gentle smile of a man who couldn't follow all the words, but felt something warm in them anyway. "Well," he said, "thank you kindly." He didn't know what he was thanking me for, and I put my head down on that old man's hands, and I wept not for Elijah, and not for the money, and not even for myself. I wept for every year this good man should have had and didn't, for the life that was stolen from him, along with his name. 40 years too late, in a yellow room that smelled of disinfectant, I finally met the man my husband really was by kneeling at the feet of the man he'd wronged. There was no grand courtroom finish. I want to be honest about that because life isn't a movie. I took everything from that box to Denise Holloway, and she told me the hard truth. The theft was 40 years old. The false testimony, the fraud, the conviction, all of it was long past any statute that could touch it. There was no lawsuit that could give Nathaniel Boyd his 7 years back. No judge left to hear the case. In the eyes of the law, it was simply too late. But the law isn't the only thing that decides what's true, so I did what I could do. With Denise's help, I began the long, slow process of clearing Nathaniel Boyd's name. A formal petition, a pardon effort, a paper trail put in front of anyone who would look at it, so that the record would show at last what had actually happened in 1983. I went to the company that had bought Whitfield Industrial, and I handed over the design notebooks, and I asked them for one thing to acknowledge in writing and in public, that the coupling that carried the Whitfield name had been invented by a man named Nathaniel Boyd. And I took Elijah's $2 million, the guilty man's half measure, the apology he set aside and couldn't finish, and I did what he never had the nerve to do. I made it whole. I established the Nathaniel Boyd Foundation, and I funded it not with $2 million but with a great deal more, because the truth was that nearly every dollar I owned had been built on what that man made. Scholarships in his name for young people, coming up the way he had, poor and gifted and with something in them worth building. His name in bronze on something good. Camille fought me on it. She stood in my living room and told me she hadn't done any of it for money, that she wouldn't take it, that it would feel like being paid off. And I told her the only thing I knew to be true. This was never yours to refuse, I said, and it was never mine to give. I'm just the one who happened to be standing here holding it when the truth came out. It belongs to your father. It always did. Money remembers where it came from. Elijah said it 1,000 times, and I finally understood he'd been telling on himself the whole while. So I sent his money back where it came from. All the way back. It was not a perfect ending. Julian and Camille are still finding their way through what she did and what it cost. Some mornings are good and some are hard, and I don't know yet how their story ends. Elijah's name, the one half of Durham, stood up in church to praise will not shine the way it did. I made sure of that, and I'd make sure of it again. Some legends deserve to fall. Nathaniel Boyd died 4 months after I met him on a warm afternoon in his room on Route 9, with Camille on one side of him and me on the other. He had a good day near the end. One of his last. Camille came to fetch me breathless, saying, "He's clear today, come now, come." And I sat with him, and Camille told him gently the way you'd give good news to a child, that the world was going to know he built the coupling, that his name was being cleared, that there was a foundation with his name on it and young people who would carry it forward. And this time he understood. I watched it land in his eyes, real understanding for maybe the last time. He was quiet a while. Then he looked out the window and he said, "I always did know it was a good design." Just that. Not bitter, not angry. A maker at the end, taking a quiet pride in the thing he'd made. He passed in his sleep a few days later. I paid for the funeral. It was the least and the most I could do. People ask me now, the few who know the whole story, whether I'm sorry I ever started digging, whether I wish I'd left that box locked and kept my husband the way I'd always known him, the self-made man, the good man, the pillow on the couch. And the answer is no, because that man never existed. I spent 36 years loving a photograph, and a marriage built on a thing that isn't true isn't a marriage. It's a very long, very comfortable lie. I'd rather know. Even this. Even now. I still have his robe. I don't wear it anymore. I think about what I almost did. How close I came to spending the rest of my life protecting the wrong person, punishing the innocent one, and calling it love. I think about how sure I was. That's the part that stays with me. Not that I was wrong, but how certain I felt while I was being wrong. How righteous. I had all the pieces and they all fit, and they made a picture of a scheming young woman and a wronged old widow, and it was exactly perfectly backwards. So if you take one thing from an old woman who learned it the hard way, let it be this. When you are most certain you know who the villain is, when the story fits so well, it feels like relief that is the exact moment to turn the picture over and look again. My husband spent 40 years teaching our son that money remembers where it came from. He just never mentioned that it also remembers who it was taken from.